What's up guys, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh video. So there's been a lot of talk recently about Genamint, which is the new artificial intelligence grading technology that PSA has acquired. And I've had some people ask me questions about it on Instagram as well. So I thought I'd make this video to go into my own thoughts about it, both in terms of what I think is good about this new technology, but also things which I think people need to realize and be cautious about in terms of problems that it may encounter, and why it's not necessarily actually a replacement for human graders. So yeah, first of all, I'll go into what I think is good, and then we'll get into the problems later on in the video. Now, if anyone hasn't seen the demo video that Genumint posted on their website, I'd recommend checking that out before you watch the rest of this video, because it'll give you a better idea of how the technology works than what I'm realistically going to be able to describe here. So I'll put a link to that in the description down below. But essentially, the machine takes a scan of a card and then analyzes it very closely using algorithms it's been programmed with, to assign it first with subgrades, including the eye appeal, and then an overall grade of what it thinks is right for the card. And there are a few things I think this will be really good at in terms of how it will improve the grading process. So the most obvious one would be centering, because obviously when you take a scan of a card, you can analyze the centering completely objectively, how far it's shifted, how much it's tilted, everything like that. Then in terms of the edges and corners as well, any kind of whitening will show up very clearly on that scan. So in theory, this new technology will mean that no card with significant whitening or that is significantly off-center would be able to slip through as a Genumint grade. Now, in terms of the surface, it's a bit harder to say how that will be able to assess it, because if it only has one scan, no matter how high the quality is, it won't be able to pick up all kinds of issues such as dents or bends or just minor surface irregularities. So that's one thing to be concerned about. Now, it is possible if you have multiple light sources in the same scanner, you would be able to combine multiple images and then get a better idea of the surface profile as well. And I don't know if that technology includes that. If it does, then it'll probably give you a reasonably good idea of the surface. But either way, it'll definitely help with assigning the edge and corner grades, as well as the centering. And one more thing to point out that I think will be really good in terms of actually what it sees on the card would be detecting any kind of alterations. So for example, if the card is inked, so that the border doesn't appear white or anything like that. Because whereas to the naked eye, often a well-inked card can actually be quite deceptive, and you have to kind of flip it over to the side to see if there's any ink showing through on the border to make sure. When you have a really high resolution scan like this scanner will be able to take, it means that even if it is really close to matching the color of whatever it's replacing, there will be various details such as, well, the exact shade of the alteration, but also, for example, the fact that there won't be any rosette pattern underneath it, which will make it actually much easier to detect alterations. So in theory, any kind of inked card or glued card or anything like that should be really easy to detect using this technology, and I think that's a great step forward, which Genamint will help PSA make. One other thing which did occur to me in terms of Yu-Gi-Oh cards that could be very good, depending on how they use the technology, is also the fact that it'll be able to tell different variants of cards apart very easily. So, for example, this Power of Kaishin here is a reprint, and you can tell that partially because it says spell card, but some spell cards actually are original prints from 2003 as well. But as long as the machine is programmed correctly, then it will be able to realize that the font in the text box is actually slightly larger than on the original card. I mean, it lines up differently, which is the same for all reprints. And so it will be able to automatically label this or any other reprint as a reprint on those grounds. And so in theory, it can label stuff like that without the human error of graders having to decide whether they think it's a reprint or not, which results in a lot of errors. But where I think the technology will really struggle is when you move from converting the raw condition of the card. So it'll have a list of essentially all the defects you can recognize on the card and the centering, etc., etc. But converting that into a grade, so saying whether that means it's a 9, whether that means it's a 10, is much more difficult, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So one thing would be, for example, needing to have specific knowledge about defects that you get in various prints. Now you get this in all sorts of card games. So for example, in Magic the Gathering, you get some of the earlier prints like Alpha, they have very strangely cut corners, and that's actually meant to be a feature of the card. But if you just scan it with this kind of artificial intelligence, it'll probably give all Alpha cards a corner score of 6 or below just because of how the corners are flipped up. And there are a lot of similar things in Yu-Gi-Oh as well. So for example, with the earlier sets, you get faded cards where the magenta ink is missing, but that artificial intelligence, unless it's programmed very carefully, specifically for these cards, will give you an extremely low surface score on a card like this, and also the eye appeal would be drastically lowered, so it wouldn't get any kind of decent grade, whereas I would say this card is correctly assigned the grade of Mint 9, and that's what most collectors would give it as well. And it's not just faded cards, there's all sorts of other things. So for example, with glossy print cards, this is just one niche example, but all glossy print cards are shifted up on the back compared to whatever the front centering is. And that's something which realistically isn't supposed to affect the grade, because if it did, then it would be literally impossible to get a Genmint 10 on any glossy print ultra. But with the artificial intelligence, unless it's programmed very carefully, it'll automatically assign them all 9s or lower, which again is not the correct grade. And if you go to later eras as well, obviously a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh cards have famous problems with waxing. So Soul of the Duelist is probably the worst. And a lot of the cards from that print run just have waxing all down the back. Now, I think it's already a problem how to grade these. A lot of graders won't give you higher than like a PSA 8 if you have serious waxing on the back. But again, with the artificial intelligence, that'll probably automatically knock the surface score to a 6 or maybe even a 5, because there's so much scuffing on the back. And you'd have to have it attuned to each set to be able to assign a fair grade. So for example, with Soul of the Duelist, you have to be a lot more lenient than you would with another set where the waxing is much less common. And then just one more thing with Ultimate Rares would obviously be the stamp on the back. Again, this is something which does already vary from grader to grader, so at least the artificial intelligence in theory can make it more consistent. But Ultimate Rares often have the square on the back, and even the sometimes the imprint of the monster showing through on European print cards. And that's something which again would be knocked very significantly if you're just looking at that on a scan and seeing that defect and assuming it's some kind of dent or something like that. And so it's another thing where the artificial intelligence will have to be specifically informed about Ultimate Rares being graded differently to other cards. So when you add all of these things up together, there are virtually for every single set, there'll be different things you have to note. Some sets have tilted centering like MFC. Then all of this, not just in Yu-Gi-Oh, but in every card game, means that you would have to have an absolutely massive database of just hundreds of different examples of every single card that PSA ever grades in order to be able to assign an accurate grade to each card just using the artificial intelligence. And I think that's actually why PSA has made it so that, as far as we know from what they've said in their press releases, the artificial intelligence will not be being used to assign grades to any card. It will only be used as a guide for the grader, as an assistant essentially, that reduces the margin for error by showing them what the defects on the card is, or what they are rather. And in my opinion, that's definitely how it should be, because as I just pointed out, while you could theoretically have the perfect artificial intelligence that could assign the correct grade to every single card, it would literally have to have detailed knowledge of how every single card is and the variance that every single card can show in order to be able to assign that grade itself. So yeah, putting everything together, I think Genamint has a lot of potential to do good for PSA's grading system. It should make things a lot faster once they've been able to get enough machines in to put it across all service levels and on every single card being graded. I think it should reduce the margin for error, make it so that a lot fewer kind of weak 10s and things like that will slip through, especially when the defects are to do with centering or edges and corners. I think though that you cannot get too carried away and think it's going to mean that suddenly all grades are completely objective, because first of all, there are going to be those problems with detecting surface issues, which I do think will be a significant issue based on at least the demo they've given and how that technology looks that it works. But also then that shift from like realizing what the condition of the card is to how you assign the grade accordingly, because obviously as I've shown just now, you get factory defects which shouldn't knock the grade, but you also just get a lot of situations, a lot of gray areas where it's always going to be down to the grader to assign that eye appeal, because for example, a card might have 5 scratches on the foil, but if those scratches are on an area of the foil which don't show up that that closely, which don't kind of affect the direct eye appeal of what you see when you look at the card, they may not necessarily knock the grade that far. But if those same 5 scratches, same length, same depth, are on a different card in the same place, where the artwork is aligned differently so that that area of the foil shows up a lot more brightly, then that will affect the grade more significantly. And all of these kinds of things would just be, in my opinion, impossible to program into a machine because the amount of data it would have to store is just not feasible. It would be, terabytes upon terabytes. And again, you'd need a lot of processing power to be able to access all of that data, even if you had it all stored in one place. So yeah, I do think it's a positive step forward. I do think it will improve PSA's grading, but I also think that humans will remain absolutely integral to the grading process. They will be in charge, or at least certainly they should be in charge of what the overall grade is at this point in time. And in that sense, I don't expect to see it change grading that significantly. It should remove the biggest outliers, but beyond that, it should not really change what's going on at PSA that much. And similarly, when this kind of technology moves to other grading companies as well. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you agree with me, if you think I've missed something, if you think I'm not assessing the situation correctly, whatever it might be. Or if you just have suggestions for future videos you'd like to see or anything like that. I'm always happy to have a discussion in the comments. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you have a great day, and I will see you all next time.